November 6, 1956. British troops are advancing down the Suez Canal. Port Said has fallen. The road south is open. And at midnight, Britain stops the war. That morning, Harold Macmillan, Britain's Chancellor and one of the invasion's loudest hawks, tells the cabinet that $280 million has vanished from the country's dollar reserves in 7 days. Later, Bank of England dealing records put the real week's loss at somewhere between $85 million and $116 million. The published number for the whole month? $279 million. Macmillan has handed the cabinet almost a month's loss as 1 week's catastrophe. 9 weeks later, Prime Minister Anthony Eden is gone, and Macmillan is Prime Minister. Why was the number wrong? And how can it stop an army that is winning? The answer begins 4 months earlier with a code word in Alexandria. Egypt's president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, stands before a vast crowd. Buried inside his speech is a name, de Lesseps, the Frenchman who built the Suez Canal. It is a code word. Each time Nasser says it, Egyptian teams move on the canal company's offices. By the time he finishes speaking, Egypt controls the company and the canal. Nasser promises compensation. The pilots stay at work. The ships keep moving. On the water, almost nothing looks like a crisis. In London, that calm does not matter. Suez is the shortcut between Europe and Asia. 2/3 of Europe's oil passes through it. And to Prime Minister Anthony Eden, the canal is proof that Britain can still make the world obey. Britain depends on oil shipped through Suez. Close the canal, and that oil has to sail around Africa instead. A longer voyage paid in dollars Britain is running out of. Only America can protect the pound. And Eden is secretly planning to invade Egypt without telling Eisenhower. On October 22nd, representatives of Britain, France, and Israel meet at a villa outside Paris. Over 3 days, they design a war disguised as a peacekeeping operation. The trick works only if Egypt does exactly what the plotters know it must. Israel attacks across the Sinai. Britain and France order both sides away from the canal. Egypt is told to abandon its own territory. When it refuses, Britain and France invade as the supposed peacekeepers. The plot's first fatal mistake is paperwork. It is written down and signed. The Protocol of Sèvres. Eden is horrified that a paper trail exists. British officials return to Paris and try to recover every copy. The French refuse. Israel carries one home. The entire plan rests on one bet. America will complain, but it will not punish an ally. Eisenhower and Eden had served together during the war. America disliked Nasser, and Eisenhower was days from an election, campaigning as the president who had ended a war. Eden sees 3 reasons America will swallow the insult. But the stop sign is already in writing. In September, Eisenhower had warned that American opinion flatly rejects the thought of using force. Eden treats the warning as diplomatic theater. His loudest ally is Harold Macmillan, Britain's Chancellor, and the man responsible for its money. Macmillan has just returned from Washington. He knows Eisenhower, he tells the cabinet. I know Ike. He will lie doggo. In other words, Eisenhower will stay quiet. Within 2 weeks, that confidence will become the number that stops the war. But Eisenhower has spotted the leverage Eden has missed. Britain's army can move without American permission. Britain's currency cannot survive a run without American dollars. The vulnerability is a promise. £1 will always buy $2.80. By Britain's own official boast, sterling finances half the world's trade and payments. Governments, companies and banks keep enormous balances in London because Britain promises that fixed price will hold. That turns every overseas pound account into a test of confidence. Imagine a bank in Zurich holding millions of pounds. The moment it suspects Britain cannot keep the promise, it hands London those pounds and demands dollars at the guaranteed rate, before the rate breaks. Britain cannot refuse. Every frightened seller drains the same stockpile of dollars. At the end of October, that stockpile is $2.244 billion. British officials regard $2 billion as the danger line. The entire buffer between imperial confidence and financial panic is just $244 million. Now the number from our opening has teeth. If $280 million really vanished in 1 week, Britain has already burned through more than its safety margin. That is the trap. Britain can win ground in Egypt and lose the war in London. And only Washington has the dollars and the influence at the International Monetary Fund to stop the bleeding. On October 29th, the trap starts closing. Israel attacks across the Sinai. The next day, Britain and France deliver their rehearsed ultimatum. Egypt rejects it. The day after that, British bombers strike Egyptian airfields. The performance convinces almost no one. At the United Nations, the United States and the Soviet Union line up against Britain and France. In a single afternoon, Washington stands with Moscow against its oldest ally. In London, holders of sterling begin selling pounds for dollars. Then Nasser turns the canal itself into a weapon. Egypt sinks ships loaded with rock and cement across the channel. The waterway Britain invaded to keep open is now closed because Britain invaded. From this point on, 2 clocks are running. The army's clock in Egypt and the Treasury's clock in London. Britain is winning the wrong race. Now Washington closes 2 exits. Door 1 is oil. An emergency plan already exists. American crude, moved by American tankers. Eisenhower refuses to activate it. Those who began this operation, he tells his aides, should be left to boil in their own oil. Door 2 is credit, an IMF loan. But the United States is the fund's largest shareholder. While the fighting continues, Washington will not support the loan Britain needs. The pressure is devastating because Eisenhower does not have to attack the pound. He only has to refuse to rescue it. By November 4th, Eden gets one last chance to escape the trap without admitting defeat. The United Nations puts an emergency peace force on the table. He can stop, claim that international troops will protect the canal, and preserve Britain's dollar reserves. Instead, he orders the assault to continue. On November 5th, he gambles on speed one last time. British and French paratroopers drop around Port Said, seize the canal before diplomats can stop them, then force the world to accept what the troops have already done. That night, Moscow threatens Britain and France with rocket weapons. It sounds like the climax. It is not. The cabinet is alarmed, but it does not stop for Moscow. The following morning, Election Day in America, the cabinet meets at 9:45. Macmillan reverses himself. The man who said Eisenhower would lie doggo now speaks as Chancellor rather than Hawke, and the number from our opening enters the room. His number is $280 million. What he says Britain has lost from its reserves in the first week of November. At that pace, he warns, Britain is approaching disaster. And the IMF rescue cannot move against Washington. At the same meeting, good military news arrives from Egypt. It changes nothing. A run on a currency does not care who is advancing on the beach. The army is still winning the wrong race. That evening, Eden announces a ceasefire, effective at midnight. British forces are barely 20 miles down a 100-mile canal, an operation built on speed stops with 4/5 of the waterway still ahead. Just before 1 o'clock in Washington, Eisenhower calls Eden. He is hours from an electoral landslide, but he is not calling to negotiate. I don't give a damn how the election goes, he tells him. The election excuse collapses in one sentence. Eden's central assumption, that Eisenhower would not punish Britain, has never existed. The ceasefire ends the shooting. It does not open either rescue door. Washington demands withdrawal, total and unconditional. Britain's dollar reserves keep falling. The emergency oil plan stays frozen. In December, petrol rationing begins in the country that had gone to war to protect its oil supply. On December 3rd, Britain announces that it will withdraw. That same afternoon, George Humphrey, Eisenhower's Treasury Secretary, begins organizing the support he had withheld. The dollars have not changed. Britain's obedience has. 1 week later, the IMF approves a $1.3 billion package for Britain, then the largest in the fund's history. The rescue doors open only after Britain commits to withdraw. The money is saved. One problem remains. The paperwork proves the war was a plot. On December 20th, Eden is asked in Parliament whether Britain knew Israel would attack Egypt. He answers, "There was not foreknowledge that Israel would attack Egypt. There was not." He knows that a signed plan exists. Britain tried and failed to recover every copy. Israel's copy survives. The receipt outlives the denial. 9 weeks after the ceasefire, Eden resigns, citing his health. The Protocol of Sèvres remains hidden for decades until the surviving document is finally published. The War Britain denied planning in typescript with signatures. Then historians reopen Macmillan's figure. The Bank of England's dealing records put the week somewhere between $85 million and $116 million. The entire month comes to $279 million, almost exactly the $280 million he gave as 1 week's loss. No surviving record proves why. It may have been panic, bad treasury data, or a former hawk forcing an end to a war he now knew Britain could not finance. Do not mistake a disputed trigger for an imaginary crisis. Sterling was under attack. Britain's dollar reserves were draining. Washington had blocked both exits. The wrong figure did not create the trap. It made the countdown look roughly 3 times faster. Eisenhower had already turned oil, credit, and the pound into the walls around it. The motive is unresolved. The succession is not. When Eden resigns, the man who read out the number becomes Prime Minister. Egypt kept the canal. Britain withdrew. And British governments absorbed a rule they would rarely challenge again: never launch a major operation if Washington can pull the financial floor out from under it. The canal is still there. In a normal year, by value, roughly $1 in every 8 of world trade passes Port Said, the place where Britain's last imperial gamble ran out of dollars.